I remember the exact shape of my brother's mouth when he said it. Not the lie itself that came earlier, softer, more rehearsed. I mean the moment after, when the heavy oak front door was closing behind me. Elijah leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest, a smirk playing on his lips. "Good luck, loser," he chuckled. He said it like he was wishing me a pleasant afternoon. After his lie, my dad had just kicked me out. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just said okay and left. But what Elijah and my father didn't know was that in exactly 3 days, karma would arrive at their doorstep, and it would be absolutely inevitable. Before I tell you about the explosive moment that completely destroyed my brother's smug world, please leave a comment down below with a why, so I know you are ready to listen to the whole story. The air outside smelled like freshly cut grass and wet asphalt. Someone down the street was watering their hydrangeas. It was a perfectly normal Tuesday evening in our quiet suburban neighborhood, completely at odds with the fact that my entire life had just been uprooted. I stood on the driveway with nothing but a canvas backpack slung over my right shoulder. Inside were 3 pairs of jeans, a few shirts, my laptop, and my toothbrush. That was it. That was 28 years of my life packed into a single bag. I didn't turn around to look at the house. I knew if I did, I would see my stepmother, Sarah, peering through the sheer living room curtains, making sure the trash had actually taken itself out. I could feel the gravel crunching under my boots. Every step I took away from that property felt strangely light. The lie Elijah had spun was simple but devastating. A missing bracelet. It was a vintage piece, a delicate silver band with a small, deep blue sapphire. It belonged to my late mother. My dad never talked about it, but he also never moved it from its velvet box inside his study desk. Elijah looked our father dead in the eye and swore he saw me take it. He claimed he tried to stop me, and he told my dad that I just laughed in his face and pocketed the jewelry. The most agonizing part was not Elijah's fabricated story. Elijah had been lying since he was old enough to speak. The agonizing part was my father. He didn't ask me a single question. He didn't demand an explanation. He just stood in the kitchen, his large hands flat on the granite counter, his shoulders tense, and told me to pack a bag and get out. I waited for him to look at me. I waited for a flicker of doubt in his eyes, a moment where he remembered that I was his eldest son, the one who never asked for a dime. He never met my gaze. So I went upstairs. I walked past the framed family photos in the hallway where my face was always slightly hidden in the back row. I packed my clothes in total silence. I didn't touch the bracelet. I had never touched the bracelet. I didn't even know where my father kept the key to that specific drawer. The first strange thing about that evening was how incredibly quiet my mind was. I didn't argue. I didn't shed a single tear. I didn't even try to formulate a plan for where I would sleep that night. I just kept walking down the sidewalk, past the familiar mailboxes and the glowing street lamps, letting the cool evening breeze hit my face. I was completely numb. It was the absolute silence of a heart that had finally stopped trying to earn love from people who were determined to misunderstand me. To understand how easily my father threw me away, you have to understand the shadow I lived in for my entire life. My parents went through a bitter divorce when I was just 7 years old. It was a messy, loud separation that ended with my mother moving across the country and my father getting primary custody. 3 years later, my mother passed away. Her funeral was a blur of black coats and pitying glances. After that, my father married Sarah, and a year later, Elijah was born. From the moment Elijah took his first breath, he was the golden child. He was the fresh start my father and Sarah wanted. I was the leftover baggage from a failed marriage, a walking reminder of a past my father desperately wanted to erase. The favoritism wasn't even subtle. It was woven into the fabric of our daily lives. When Elijah turned 16, a brand new silver sedan appeared in the driveway with a massive red bow on the hood. When I turned 16, my father handed me a bus schedule and told me building character was more important than a car. I worked part-time jobs at diners and hardware stores just to buy my own clothes. Elijah had his laundry folded and placed on his bed by Sarah until he was in his 20s. I learned early on that the only way to survive in that house was to make myself invisible. I kept my grades up, stayed out of trouble, and never asked for money. But no matter what I did, I was always the problem. If a window was broken, I was interrogated. If the grocery bill was too high, Sarah would make loud, passive-aggressive comments about how much food a growing teenage boy consumes. Elijah, on the other hand, could do no wrong. He was charming, loud, and incredibly manipulative. He knew exactly how to flash a wide smile and play the victim whenever he was cornered. By the time he hit his mid-20s, he had bounced from one failed business venture to another, always funded by my father's seemingly endless patience and bank account. While I was working 50 hours a week to slowly build my career, Elijah was sleeping until noon, playing video games in the basement, and complaining that the job market was rigged against brilliant minds like his. Sarah enabled him completely. She was a master at shifting blame. Whenever my father showed a hint of frustration toward Elijah's laziness, Sarah would immediately pivot the conversation to me. She would mention how I hadn't visited enough, or how my salary wasn't impressive enough for someone my age. She built a protective fortress around her biological son by constantly directing the incoming fire toward me. I accepted this dynamic because I desperately craved a family. I swallowed the unfairness, the snide remarks, and the blatant disrespect because I thought that if I just proved my loyalty, eventually my father would see my worth. I wanted him to look at me with the same pride he reserved for Elijah. That desperate, pathetic hope kept me tethered to a house that had never truly been a home. I tolerated the toxicity because I feared being completely alone in the world. But standing on the porch, listening to Elijah call me a loser while my father remained silent inside, the last remaining thread of that hope finally snapped. I realized you cannot earn the love of people who have already decided you are worthless. The stage for my expulsion was set 3 days before the bracelet went missing. It was a Sunday evening, and my father had insisted on a family dinner to celebrate what he called Elijah's massive career breakthrough. I arrived at the house bringing a bottle of expensive wine, trying to play the part of the supportive older brother. The dining room table was set with Sarah's best porcelain plates and crystal glasses. Elijah was holding court at the head of the table. He was wearing a crisp button-down shirt that I knew our father had paid for. Next to him sat his girlfriend, Chloe. She was a quiet girl, always looking slightly uncomfortable in our house, her eyes darting between Elijah and my father. Across from me sat Julian, a guy who used to be my best friend in high school, until he realized that sucking up to Elijah was a much faster way to get free drinks and invitations to my father's country club. So, the investors are practically begging me to take their money, Elijah boasted, swirling the wine in his glass. They looked at my app prototype and said it's going to disrupt the entire market. I'm talking a 6-figure salary right out of the gate, plus equity. My father beamed, his chest visibly puffing out. I always knew you had the entrepreneurial spirit, Eli. It takes guts to build something from the ground up. I kept my eyes on my steak, cutting it into perfectly even squares. I knew for a fact that Elijah's app prototype was a basic wireframe he had paid a college student $200 to design on Fiverr. There were no investors. He had drained the last of his college fund 6 months ago and had been quietly siphoning money from my father's joint account with Sarah. "What about you, Mason?" Julian asked, a patronizing smile spreading across his face. "Still pushing papers at that logistics company? Any chance of a promotion before you turn 30? "I manage the regional supply chain, Julian," I said evenly, keeping my voice neutral. "And yes, the work is steady." Sarah scoffed softly, picking up her wine glass. "Steady is just another word for stagnant, Mason. You should learn to take risks like your brother. Fortune favors the bold." I felt my jaw tighten. The hypocrisy was suffocating. I wanted to scream that my stagnant job paid my rent, my bills, and the loan I had taken out to fix my car, while their bold son was secretly drowning in credit card debt. But I said nothing. I just took a sip of my water. After dinner, while Sarah and my father were in the kitchen making coffee, I walked toward the hallway bathroom. As I passed my father's study, the door was slightly ajar. I stopped. Inside, the heavy mahogany desk was illuminated by the desk lamp. Elijah was standing behind the desk. He was frantically pulling at the bottom drawer, the one my father kept locked, the drawer where my mother's sapphire bracelet was kept. I was about to push the door open and confront him, but a floorboard creaked behind me. I turned my head. Chloe was standing at the end of the hallway. She had seen him too. Her eyes were wide, her face pale. She looked at me, then looked away quickly, hurrying into the living room without a word. When I looked back into the study, Elijah was already walking out, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, whistling a tuneless melody. He bumped his shoulder hard against mine as he squeezed past me in the hallway. I didn't know it then, but he had just secured the weapon he would use to destroy me. The bomb detonated on Tuesday afternoon. I had driven over to the house straight from work because my father had texted me saying there was an urgent family matter. When I walked through the front door, the atmosphere was thick enough to cut with a knife. The living room looked like a crime scene. Couch cushions were thrown onto the floor, drawers were pulled out of the side tables, and books were scattered across the rug. My father was pacing back and forth in front of the fireplace. His face flushed a deep, angry red. Sarah was sitting on the edge of the armchair, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. Elijah was standing by the window, looking out at the street with an expression of deep, manufactured concern. "What happened?" I asked, dropping my keys into the bowl by the door. My father stopped pacing and glared at me. "The bracelet is gone. Your mother's sapphire bracelet." I went to the study to get some tax documents from the locked drawer, and the velvet box is empty. My stomach dropped. The image of Elijah frantically pulling at that exact drawer flashed in my mind. "Empty? Are you sure you didn't move it?" "I have kept it in the exact same spot for 15 years, Mason." My father growled, his voice vibrating with rage. "The lock was forced. Someone took a screwdriver to the wood." Before I could even suggest calling the police, Sarah stood up. She smoothed down her skirt and looked at me with cold, calculating eyes. "It's funny, isn't it? The bracelet goes missing the exact same week you were complaining about your transmission blowing out." I stared at her, genuinely stunned by the speed of the accusation. "What are you talking about?" "At dinner on Sunday, you mentioned the mechanic quoted you $2,000 to fix your car," Sarah said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "And we all know you refused to ask your father for help because of your stubborn pride. Desperate times make people do desperate things, Mason. I have money in my savings account, Sarah. I don't need to steal from my own family to fix a car." I snapped, the anger finally breaking through my calm facade. I turned to my father. "Dad, you can't seriously believe this. I would never touch her jewelry. You know what that piece meant to her." "I don't know what to believe anymore," my father said, rubbing his temples. He looked exhausted, defeated. "I think we should just check everyone's bags and cars," Elijah chimed in from the window. He stepped forward, putting a comforting hand on our father's shoulder. "If Mason didn't take it, he won't mind us taking a look, right? We just need to clear the air. We are family. It was a trap." I could see the snare tightening around my ankle, but I was so blinded by the sheer audacity of the situation that I didn't realize how deep the hole had been dug. I nodded. "Fine. Search my car. Search my apartment. Do whatever you need to do." I thought the truth was an absolute defense. I thought that because I was innocent, the facts would eventually speak for themselves. I severely underestimated the lengths a golden child will go to protect his own skin, and I underestimated how eager my family was to find a scapegoat. We didn't even make it out the front door to search my car. The moment I agreed to the search, Elijah stepped in front of me, blocking the hallway. He let out a heavy, dramatic sigh and looked down at the floor. He was playing the role of the reluctant hero, the brother torn between loyalty and justice. It made me sick to my stomach. "Dad, wait. You don't need to search his car," Elijah said, his voice trembling slightly. He looked up, his eyes wide and convincingly distressed. I didn't want to say anything. I was hoping he would just put it back and we could pretend this never happened. The room went dead silent. My father froze. "Say what, Eli?" What do you know? Elijah swallowed hard. I saw him take it. Sunday night after dinner. I was walking past the study and I saw Mason at your desk. He had the drawer open. He was holding the velvet box. You lying piece of trash, I yelled, lunging forward. My father immediately stepped between us, shoving me back hard against the wall. Let him speak, my father roared, his spit flying onto my cheek. I tried to stop him, Elijah continued, shrinking back behind our father's broad shoulders. I grabbed his arm and told him to put it back. I told him it was Mom's, and he just looked at me and laughed. He shoved the box into his jacket pocket and walked out. I was so scared of causing a scene, Dad. I thought I could convince him to return it quietly. I was hyperventilating. The sheer volume of the lie was suffocating me. Dad, he is lying. I saw him by the desk on Sunday. Chloe saw him too. Call her right now. Before my father could reach for his phone, the front door opened. Matthew, a mutual friend who had been helping Elijah network for his fake app, walked in. He stopped in his tracks, looking at the tension in the room. Bad time? Matthew asked nervously. Sarah immediately pounced. Matthew, were you with Elijah on Sunday night after dinner? Matthew shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. Yeah. We went to the bar downtown. Did Elijah say anything to you about Mason? My father asked, his voice dangerously low. Matthew looked at the floor, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, he was really upset. He had a few drinks and started crying. Said he caught Mason stealing something valuable from your office and didn't know how to tell you. My heart stopped. The floor seemed to drop out from underneath me. Matthew was lying. Matthew was confirming a timeline that didn't exist. He had traded his integrity for whatever scrap of access Elijah had promised him. I was completely boxed in. 2 witnesses against my bare word. The trap had snapped shut, and the metal teeth were biting straight to the bone. I looked at my father. I waited for the paternal instinct to kick in. I waited for the man who raised me to look into my eyes and recognize the son who had never lied to him, never stolen from him, never brought police or debt collectors to his door. But my father just looked at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. His jaw muscle twitched. He didn't see his son standing against the wall. He saw a thief. He saw a problem he finally had a legitimate excuse to get rid of. The verdict was passed without a trial, without a jury, without a single shred of physical evidence. Pack a bag, my father said softly. The quietness of his voice was more terrifying than his yelling. And get out of my house. My father stood in the kitchen, his posture rigid. The afternoon sun was streaming through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air, creating a serene backdrop to the violent fracturing of my family. He didn't point at the door. He didn't scream. He just placed his hands flat on the granite island and stared at the stainless steel sink. I want you gone before dinner, he stated, his voice devoid of any warmth. If you try to come back, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. And if I ever find out you sold that bracelet, I will spend every penny I have to bury you in legal fees. Sarah stood a few feet behind him. She didn't say a word, but she didn't have to. The slight, almost imperceptible lift of her chin and the relaxation of her shoulders told me everything. She had won. The war she had been waging against me since I was 8 years old was finally over. The usurper was being exiled. Dad, I tried one last time, my voice cracking. I swear on Mom's grave, I did not take it. You are making a mistake. You are letting him play you. Do not bring your mother into this, he suddenly roared, slamming his fist onto the counter so hard the coffee mugs rattled. She would be ashamed of what you've become. Petty thief. A liar. Blaming your own brother to save your skin. That was the breaking point. Hearing him use my dead mother to defend the son who was currently robbing him blind was the final knife twist. Something inside my chest, a tight, anxious knot that had been there for 2 decades, suddenly loosened. The desperation evaporated. The frantic need to be believed vanished. It was replaced by an icy, absolute clarity. I didn't yell back. I didn't throw my hands up. I just looked at the man who shared my DNA and realized I didn't know him at all. He wasn't a father protecting his family. He was a coward protecting his illusions. He needed Elijah to be perfect so his second marriage could be perfect. I was the sacrificial lamb required to maintain their fake domestic bliss. Okay, I said, just one word. Flat. Empty. My father blinked, seemingly caught off guard by my lack of resistance. He expected me to cry, to beg for forgiveness, to fall to my knees. When I didn't, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, but he quickly masked it with a hard scowl. I turned my back on him. I walked out of the kitchen, feeling the heavy silence of the house pressing down on me. I didn't run up the stairs. I took them one at a time, deliberately pacing my steps. I walked into my bedroom, the room I had slept in since I was a child. The walls were still painted the light blue my mother had chosen. The old oak desk where I had spent thousands of hours studying for college exams sat in the corner. I pulled my canvas backpack from the closet and started throwing things inside. I didn't pack for a long trip. I packed for a permanent departure. I left behind the expensive watch my dad had given me for graduation. I left behind the photo albums. I took nothing that tied me to his money or his name. When I zipped the bag shut, I took one final look at the room. It felt like looking at a museum exhibit of a life that no longer belonged to me. I swung the bag over my shoulder, the weight of it grounding me to reality, and walked out the door without looking back. That brings us back to the porch. Back to Elijah leaning against the doorframe, delivering his final, smug line. Good luck, loser. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. I walked down the driveway, the gravel crunching under my boots, and stepped onto the sidewalk. The walk away from the house was surreal. Felt like I was moving underwater. The neighborhood was so aggressively normal. A teenager was riding a bike down the street. A golden retriever was barking behind a wooden fence. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long golden shadows across the manicured lawns. Everything was exactly the same, yet my entire universe had shifted on its axis. I walked for over an hour without a destination in mind. My phone buzzed constantly in my pocket. Julian demanding to know what happened. A few other friends who had probably heard Elijah's immediate spin on the story. I ignored all of them. I didn't need to read their messages to know that the narrative had already been written. The prodigal son had finally shown his true colors. As the sky turned a deep, bruised purple, my feet unconsciously carried me toward the older side of town. The houses here were smaller, the trees thicker, the driveways cracked. I found myself standing in front of a small, pale yellow house with a wraparound porch covered in overgrown ivy. This was Aunt Clara's house. She was my mother's older sister. After my mother's funeral, my father and Clara had a massive falling out. Clara had always seen right through my father's arrogance, and she absolutely despised Sarah. Because of that, my father banned her from our house and forbade me from contacting her. I had only seen her a handful of times in secret over the last 10 years, mostly quick coffees near my college campus. I walked up the wooden steps, the boards creaking under my weight, and pressed the doorbell. Chimed deep inside the house. A minute later, the porch light flicked on, casting a yellow halo over me. The heavy wooden door swung open, and Aunt Clara stood there. She was wearing an oversized knitted sweater, her gray hair pulled back in a loose bun. She looked at me, then looked down at the canvas backpack slung over my shoulder. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't ask why I was standing on her porch at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night. She just stepped aside and pushed the screen door open. You look exactly like your mother when you hold your jaw like that, Clara said softly. Come inside. The kettle is already boiling. I stepped across the threshold, and the smell of Earl Grey tea and old books hit me. It was a smell I hadn't realized I was desperately homesick for. The tension in my neck finally cracked. I dropped my backpack onto the hardwood floor, the heavy thud echoing in the quiet hallway. Clara led me into the kitchen and poured 2 mugs of steaming tea. We sat at her small, scarred wooden table in total silence for 20 minutes. I wrapped my cold hands around the hot ceramic, letting the heat seep into my skin. I didn't have to explain the injustice. I didn't have to defend my character. In her house, I wasn't the problem to be fixed or the thief to be punished. I was just Mason. "You can stay in the spare room upstairs," Clara finally said, taking a slow sip of her tea. "Stay as long as you need. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. That night, I slept in a bed that wasn't mine, under a roof that wasn't my father's, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt entirely safe. The next morning, the reality of my exile began to set in. I woke up to the smell of bacon and black coffee. When I walked downstairs, Clara was reading the newspaper at the kitchen table, and her son, my cousin Dylan, was leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone. Dylan was a year older than me, a guy who treated life with a permanent laid-back shrug. "Morning, fugitive," Dylan said dryly without looking up from his screen. I sat down at the table, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Word travels fast. Dylan snorted. "You have no idea. Elijah is doing a full press tour. He called my mom last night, probably fishing to see if you were here. Then he posted a cryptic status on Facebook about betrayal from the ones closest to you. The comments are a goldmine of fake sympathy." Clara folded her newspaper sharply. "Dylan, enough. I'm just keeping him informed." Dylan defended himself, finally looking up. "Oh, by the way, the story has evolved. Not only did you steal the bracelet, but apparently, on your way out, you smashed the antique picture frame in the hallway in a fit of rage. The one with Sarah's grandparents." I stopped halfway through lifting my mug. "I didn't break anything. I walked out the front door." "I know," Dylan said, his voice dropping the sarcastic tone. "He's padding the charges, making sure you look unhinged so nobody questions the main lie. He's sloppy, Mason. He's always been sloppy." I stared into my black coffee. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Elijah wasn't just satisfied with getting me kicked out. He wanted to destroy my reputation permanently. He was salting the earth so nothing could ever grow back. "Let him talk," Clara said calmly, sliding a plate of eggs and bacon toward me. "Lies require maintenance. The truth just sits there, waiting. Eat your breakfast. You have work today, right?" I looked at her, surprised. "You think I should go to work?" "I think you shouldn't let that circus dictate your routine," she replied firmly. "You have a job. You have responsibilities. Don't give them the satisfaction of derailing your life." She was right. I finished my breakfast, put on a clean shirt from my backpack, and drove to my office. Walking into the logistics building felt like entering a parallel universe where the laws of physics still applied. My boss, Gabriel, called me into his office around noon. He was a tough, no-nonsense guy in his 50s who had mentored me for the past 3 years. He took one look at my face and closed the blinds to his office. "You look like you got hit by a truck. What's going on?" I didn't tell him everything, just the broad strokes. A family dispute, a false accusation, getting kicked out. Gabriel leaned back in his leather chair, tapping his pen against his desk. "Listen to me, Mason," Gabriel said, his voice low and serious. "I've watched you manage millions of dollars in inventory. I trust you with the keys to this warehouse. If your family can't see your integrity, that's their failure, not yours. Keep your head down, do your job. If you need an advance on your salary to get an apartment, tell payroll I authorized it." The validation hit me harder than the accusation had. Strangers trusted me more than my own flesh and blood. When I left work that evening, I pulled out my phone. I had 14 missed calls from my father and a dozen texts from Elijah playing the victim. I didn't read them. I went into my settings, blocked both of their numbers, and turned the phone off completely. I was done playing their game. The second day at Aunt Clara's house was a masterclass in psychological torture, entirely self-inflicted. Even though my phone was off, my brain wouldn't stop spinning. I sat on Clara's back porch, watching the neighbor's cat stalk a squirrel along the fence line, turning the events over and over in my head. I kept trying to find the missing puzzle piece. Why would my father believe Elijah so easily? And then, with sickening clarity, it hit me. My father didn't believe Elijah. He couldn't. He knew my mother's bracelet had a heavy, industrial lock on that drawer. He knew Elijah was the only one in the house with a history of picking locks and snooping. He knew I had never asked for money, while Elijah was constantly begging for cash to cover his tracks. My father wasn't stupid. He was a successful businessman who could spot a liar from a mile away. He knew Elijah took it. The realization felt like a physical blow to the chest. My father knew his golden child was a thief. But to admit that out loud would mean acknowledging that his parenting was a failure. It would mean dealing with Sarah's wrath. It would mean breaking the illusion of his perfect second family. So, when Elijah handed him a scapegoat on a silver platter, my father took it. He chose to sacrifice me to save himself the embarrassment of facing the truth. He traded my dignity for his peace of mind. I felt a sudden, violent surge of nausea. The betrayal was so deep, so absolute, that it fundamentally altered the way I saw the world. I wasn't just a victim of a lie, I was a casualty of a cover-up. That evening, I sat in the living room while Clara knitted in her armchair. The television was on low, playing a reruns of an old detective show. "You figured it out, didn't you?" Clara asked quietly, not looking up from her needles. I looked at her. "He knows. Dad knows Elijah did it." Clara paused her knitting. She let out a long, heavy sigh. "Robert has always been a coward, Mason. He was a coward during the divorce. He used custody threats to punish your mother, not because he wanted to raise you, but because he wanted to win. And he's a coward now. He would rather live a comfortable lie than an uncomfortable truth. How can you live with someone like that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't," Clara said firmly. She set her knitting down and looked me dead in the eye. Her gaze was sharp, calculating. "You let them build their house of cards. And then you introduce a stiff breeze." She stood up, walked over to the antique telephone table in the hallway, and picked up the receiver. She dialed a number from memory. "David?" she said into the phone. Her voice had changed. The warm, comforting aunt was gone, replaced by a woman of sharp business acumen. "It's Clara. We need to execute the contingency plan." "Yes. Tomorrow morning. The assets are at risk. Send Carter and the team." She hung up the phone and walked back into the living room. She looked at me, a fierce, protective fire burning in her eyes. "Your father thinks he has absolute power in that house," Clara said, a slight, dangerous smile playing on her lips. "He has forgotten that some things don't belong to him. Sleep well tonight, Mason. Tomorrow we take the power back." The third day began with an eerie calmness. I didn't go to work. Clara had told me to stay home, dress neatly, and wait. The tension in her house crackled like static electricity before a thunderstorm. Around 10 in the morning, Dylan arrived, dressed unusually sharp in a button-down shirt instead of his usual graphic tees. He sat at the kitchen island, rhythmically tapping his fingers on the marble, his eyes glued to his phone. "They're moving," Dylan announced quietly. "Target is secure." At exactly 11 o'clock, the storm arrived at my father's quiet suburban street. We weren't there to witness it firsthand, but Dylan had a friend who lived 3 houses down from my father, texting us the play-by-play. The friend had noticed the disruption immediately because in that neighborhood, anything out of the ordinary was prime gossip material. A sleek, pitch-black Porsche Panamera glided down the street, its engine purring with a quiet, expensive menace. It didn't park on the street. It pulled aggressively right into my father's driveway, blocking in Sarah's SUV. The doors opened, and 2 men stepped out. The first was David. He was a high-powered financial lawyer, a shark in a custom-tailored Italian suit, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. David was Clara's oldest friend and the executor of a trust my father had desperately tried to ignore for 2 decades. The second man was Carter. He didn't wear a suit. He wore a tactical polo, cargo pants, and a stern expression. Carter was a private investigator who specialized in forensic accounting and asset recovery. And just to make the point absolutely clear, a marked police cruiser pulled up along the curb a minute later, a uniformed officer stepping out to stand by the sidewalk, arms folded. According to Dylan's friend, curtains in the neighboring houses were twitching violently. People were pausing their lawnmowers. A government-looking raid on Robert's pristine lawn was the neighborhood event of the decade. "They are at the door," Dylan read from his phone, a massive grin spreading across his face. I could only imagine the scene inside. My father was likely in his study, pretending to work, while Sarah was probably watching daytime television. Secure in the knowledge that they had successfully purged the house of its problem. They thought they had won. They thought they had buried the issue along with me. David didn't ring the doorbell. He knocked. It was a heavy, authoritative knock that demanded immediate attention. When my father opened the door, his face must have dropped. He knew David. He knew exactly what David represented. "Robert," David said smoothly, his voice carrying clearly enough for the neighbors to hear. "We need to come inside. Now." My father, caught completely off guard, stepped back. "David? What the hell is going on? Why is there a police officer on my curb?" "We are executing an immediate audit and asset recovery protocol," David announced, stepping into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. Carter followed right behind him, his eyes scanning the interior of the house like a hawk looking for prey. "We have reason to believe that high-value property belonging to the estate of Eleanor has been compromised." Eleanor, my mother's name. Hearing it invoked like a legal weapon sent a shiver down my spine even from miles away. The trap my father and Elijah thought they had set for me was actually a cage they had built for themselves, and David had just arrived to lock the door. The inside of the house instantly descended into chaos. Dylan's friend couldn't see past the foyer, but he could hear the shouting through the open front door. Sarah came rushing out of the living room, her face pale. "Robert, who are these people? You can't just barge into our home." "Mrs. Sarah," David said, his tone icy and polite, "I assure you, I have every legal right to be here. I represent the trust of Eleanor's estate. The sapphire bracelet that went missing from this property 2 days ago does not belong to your husband. It is an asset of the trust, legally owned by Clara, intended for Mason upon his 30th birthday. Its disappearance constitutes felony grand larceny." My father's face drained of color. "Clara's? What are you talking about? That was my wife's jewelry. Your late wife transferred ownership to her sister prior to the divorce being finalized, specifically to protect it from your assets." David corrected him sharply, opening his briefcase and pulling out a thick stack of legal documents. "It was loaned to you for safekeeping, a condition you have clearly violated. Now, where is Elijah?" Hearing his name, Elijah slowly descended the stairs. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. The arrogant smirk he wore when he kicked me out was completely gone. He saw the police officer standing outside the window, and he began to shake. I don't know what's going on," Elijah stammered, gripping the banister. "Mason took it. We kicked him out. He stole it." Carter, the private investigator, stepped forward. He didn't look at my father. He locked his eyes directly onto Elijah. "We know Mason didn't take it, kid, because we've been running a forensic audit on this family's finances for the past 48 hours at Clara's request. And what we found was very interesting." Carter pulled a tablet from his bag. "We found massive irregularities in your father's joint accounts. Someone has been siphoning thousands of dollars over the last 6 months. Cash withdrawals, crypto transfers, debt payments. All traced back to devices registered to you, Elijah." Sarah gasped, clutching her chest. "That's impossible. Elijah is starting a business. The investors." "There are no investors, ma'am," Carter interrupted bluntly. "Your son is broke, drowning in debt, and he has been robbing his own father blind. And when he got desperate, he forced the lock on the study desk to steal a piece of jewelry worth $20,000 to pawn it." "You're lying," Elijah screamed, his voice cracking hysterically. "You have no proof. You can't just come in here and accuse me." "Proof?" Carter raised an eyebrow, a predatory smile crossing his face. He turned to David. He wants proof. We have authorization to search the premises to recover stolen trust property, David stated calmly. He pointed directly up the stairs. Carter, start with his bedroom. Check the closet. Check behind the shoe boxes. Check everywhere. Elijah lunged forward to block the stairs, panic completely taking over his body. No, you can't go up there. Dad, do something. Stop them. But my father couldn't move. He stood frozen in the hallway, looking from the legal documents in David's hands to the terrified, guilty face of his golden child. The illusion was shattering right in front of his eyes. The lie he had chosen to believe to protect his pride was now tearing his entire life apart in broad daylight. Back at Clara's house, I listened to Dylan relay the events, feeling my heart pound against my ribs. The eye of the storm had passed over me, and now it was ripping the roof off their perfectly manicured lives. Dylan's friend was typing so fast the text bubbles on my phone were appearing in rapid, frantic succession. From what he could see through the open front door and the large bay windows, the living room had become a war zone. Carter didn't wait for my father to grant him permission. He simply walked past Elijah, his heavy boots thudding against the hardwood floor, and headed straight for the staircase. "Hey, you can't go up there," Elijah yelled, finally finding his voice. He scrambled up the stairs, trying to grab the back of Carter's tactical polo, but the police officer stepped inside the doorway and simply cleared his throat. It was a low, warning sound that froze Elijah in his tracks. Carter reached the landing and pushed open the door to Elijah's bedroom. It was exactly as messy as it always was. Clothes piled on the floor, half-empty energy drink cans scattered across the computer desk. My father and Sarah had followed them up the stairs, hovering in the hallway. My father was hyperventilating, his face a terrifying shade of pale gray. He kept looking at David, demanding an explanation, but David just stood in the doorway, checking his gold wristwatch with an expression of complete boredom. "This is an illegal search," Sarah shrieked, clutching her pearl necklace. "Robert, call our lawyer right now. They are violating our rights." "Go ahead and call him, Sarah," David said smoothly. "I'm sure he'll be thrilled to bill you $300 an hour to explain the concept of asset recovery regarding a legally executed trust." Inside the room, Carter didn't tear the place apart. He was a professional. He knew exactly what he was looking for. He walked straight to the walk-in closet. He pushed aside the rows of expensive sneakers my father had bought for Elijah. In the very back, hidden under a pile of discarded gym bags, was a stack of old shoe boxes. Carter pulled the bottom one out. He opened it, dug past some old receipts, and pulled out the small, deep blue velvet box. He turned around and held it up. The silver clasp caught the light from the hallway. Elijah backed up against the wall, his breathing shallow and rapid. I didn't put that there," he stammered, his eyes darting wildly around the room. "Mason must have planted it. He sneaked back in and planted it to frame me. He knew you were coming." "Mason hasn't been within 5 miles of this house in 3 days," Carter said, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. He opened the box to confirm the sapphire bracelet was inside, then placed it securely into an evidence bag. Before Elijah could spin another desperate lie, the front door downstairs opened again. Heavy footsteps echoed up the staircase. Wyatt, another police officer, walked up to the landing, and right behind him, trembling like a leaf but holding her head high, was Chloe, Elijah's girlfriend. Elijah's jaw dropped. "Chloe? What are you doing here? Tell them Mason took it." Chloe didn't look at him. She looked at my father. She reached into her purse and pulled out her smartphone. Her hands were shaking violently, but she tapped the screen a few times and held it up. "I couldn't do it anymore, Mr. Robert," Chloe said, her voice cracking, tears streaming down her face. "I couldn't watch what he was doing to Mason. I was there on Sunday night. I saw him go into your study." She hit play on the video. The volume was turned all the way up. Through the phone speaker, everyone in the hallway, heard the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against wood as the lock was forced. The video showed Elijah standing behind my father's desk, ripping the drawer open, grabbing the velvet box, and shoving it into his pocket. And then, the audio picked up his voice, whispering to himself, "Let's see the golden boy talk his way out of this one." The silence in the hallway was deafening. The digital recording played on a loop, the sound of the breaking lock echoing off the walls again and again. Elijah sank to the floor, burying his face in his hands. The lie was dead, and the executioner was the only person he thought he had completely controlled. My father stood completely paralyzed. The smartphone screen in Chloe's hand was the undeniable proof that his entire worldview was a meticulously constructed fraud. He looked at Elijah, who was now curled into a pathetic ball on the carpet, sobbing loudly and aggressively, hoping to drum up a final ounce of sympathy. But my father didn't reach down to comfort him. He actually took a step back, as if his youngest son had suddenly caught a contagious disease. "Why?" my father whispered, his voice completely hollow. "Why would you do this? I give you everything. I pay for your car. I pay for your life." David stepped forward, stepping right over Elijah's legs. He adjusted his suit jacket and looked my father dead in the eye. "He did it because he is entirely out of money, Robert, and he has been robbing you blind for 6 months," David stated, his voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "When Clara requested a forensic audit to locate the bracelet, Carter's team pulled your joint financial records. Elijah has been siphoning your retirement funds. He used your credit lines to pay off his own private gambling debts. He forged your signature on a secondary mortgage application for this very house. The money for his supposed investors. It went straight to a sports betting syndicate." Sarah let out a blood-curdling scream. She pushed past David and grabbed my father by the shoulders. "Tell them they are lying, Robert. Our money is fine. You checked the accounts last week." "He checked the dummy statements Elijah forwarded to his email," Carter interjected, sliding his tablet toward my father. "Look at the real ledger. Your savings are gone, sir. You are effectively $50,000 in debt, and your son was stealing a family heirloom to pawn it just to keep his bookies from breaking his kneecaps." My father looked at the tablet. The glowing screen illuminated the deep lines on his face. He seemed to age 20 years in a matter of seconds. The financial ruin was bad, but the source of the ruin was what truly broke him. The son he had chosen, the son he had sacrificed my mental health to protect, was the architect of his destruction. "And concerning the bracelet," David continued, his tone shifting into pure legal authority, "you seem to be under the impression it was yours to keep. It was not. Eleanor's inheritance was structured very specifically during your divorce. She knew exactly what kind of man you were. The bracelet, along with a sizable college fund, was placed into a trust managed by Clara. You were permitted to hold the jewelry until Mason's 30th birthday, under the strict condition that it remain safe. You failed. You allowed a thief to break a lock under your own roof." "It's just a bracelet," Sarah spat, her face twisted in ugly, desperate fury. "Take it and get out of my house. It is grand larceny." The police officer, Wyatt, finally spoke up, stepping forward with a pair of steel handcuffs. He looked down at Elijah. "Elijah Robert, stand up. You are being placed under arrest for the theft of property exceeding $10,000 in value, and pending further investigation into wire fraud and identity theft." Dad, please, don't let them take me," Elijah screamed, thrashing wildly on the floor. He grabbed the hem of my father's trousers, begging like a child. "I'll pay it back. I'll fix the app. Just tell them to stop." My father looked down at the hands gripping his pants. For a brief second, I wonder if Dylan's friend thought my father would try to fight the police. Instead, my father slowly reached down, peeled Elijah's fingers off his leg, and took another step back. "Take him," my father whispered to the officer. Sarah collapsed onto the floor, wailing, as Wyatt pulled Elijah to his feet, wrenched his arms behind his back, and clicked the handcuffs shut. The sound of the locking metal echoed through the house, a permanent and terrifying finality to the golden child's reign. They marched him down the stairs, out the front door, and pressed him into the back of the police cruiser in front of the entire neighborhood. The curtains in every window on the street were wide open. The humiliation was absolute, and it was public. Back at Aunt Clara's house, Dylan put his phone face down on the kitchen island. The text updates had stopped. The police cruiser had driven away. The black Porsche had smoothly backed out of the driveway and vanished down the street, leaving my father and Sarah standing in the ruins of their shattered reality. I sat on the living room sofa, staring at the blank television screen. The silence in Clara's house felt heavy, thick with the weight of what had just transpired. I had spent my entire life imagining what it would feel like to finally be vindicated. I thought it would feel like a parade. I thought I would feel an overwhelming sense of triumph, a rush of adrenaline and righteous anger. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt incredibly, deeply tired. It was a bone-deep exhaustion that seeped into my muscles. The war was over, but looking at the battlefield, there were no winners. Just a broken family and a mountain of lies that had finally collapsed under its own weight. Suddenly, the absolute quiet of the room was shattered by a sharp buzzing. My phone, which had been sitting on the coffee table, lit up. The screen displayed a contact name I hadn't seen ring through in years. I had blocked him, but he must have called from Sarah's phone, or perhaps the landline. I stared at the glowing rectangle as it vibrated angrily against the wood. I didn't reach for it. I just watched it ring. Clara walked into the living room, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked at the phone, then looked at me. She didn't say a word. She just walked over to the armchair and sat down, giving me the space to make my own choice. The ringing stopped. 10 seconds later, the screen lit up again. Voicemail. My finger hovered over the screen. A morbid curiosity compelled me to tap the playback button. I put the phone on speaker, resting it on the table. My father's voice filled the room. It didn't sound like the booming, authoritative voice that had ordered me out of his kitchen just 3 days ago. It sounded small. It sounded broken, raspy, and desperate. Mason! The voice cracked immediately. Mason, please pick up. I know you're at Clara's. I don't even know what to say. The police took Elijah. He took the money. He took your mother's bracelet. God, Mason, I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. I was blind. I let Sarah get in my head. I wanted so badly to believe that I had built a good family, and I destroyed the only good thing I actually had. Please just come home. Let me fix this. Let me make it right. Please call me back. The message ended with a click. The room plunged back into silence. I looked at the phone. For 20 years, I would have traded my own soul to hear my father speak those words. I would have crawled over broken glass for an apology like that. I had spent countless nights staring at my bedroom ceiling, wondering what I had to do to make him realize I was worthy of his love. And now here it was, the ultimate apology, the complete surrender, and I felt absolutely nothing. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. I didn't need him anymore. The desperate, lonely kid inside me who wanted his dad to be his hero had finally died, starving to death in that cold house. I had grieved the loss of my father years ago. I just hadn't realized it until this exact moment. A single tear slipped down my cheek, hot and fast. Then another. I wasn't crying because I missed him. I was crying because of the immense, overwhelming relief. The heavy, suffocating chain that had bound me to his approval simply snapped and dissolved into dust. Clara stood up, walked over, and sat beside me on the sofa. She wrapped her arm around my shoulders and pulled me close. She smelled like lavender and warm tea. I leaned into her, letting the tears fall silently, washing away 2 decades of poison. I was finally free. The next morning, the sky was a brilliant, unclouded blue. I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. The knot of anxiety that usually sat right behind my ribs was completely gone. I got out of bed, put on a sharp suit I had packed in my canvas bag, and went downstairs to make coffee. Today, I was going back to the office. I had a life to build, and for the first time, no one was actively trying to tear it down. I walked out of Clara's front door at exactly 7:30 to catch the commuter bus. The crisp morning air hit my face, clean and refreshing. I walked down the wooden porch steps, adjusting my briefcase strap. That was when I saw it. Parked directly across the street, idling quietly by the curb, was my father's sedan. He must have been sitting there for hours. The moment he saw me step out of the house, the engine cut off. The driver's side door opened slowly, heavily. My father stepped out onto the asphalt. I almost didn't recognize him. He was wearing the same clothes he had on the day before. His tie was loose, his shirt wrinkled. He hadn't shaved, and deep, dark bags hung under his bloodshot eyes. He looked completely defeated, a king whose castle had burned to the ground overnight. He didn't cross the street. He just stood by the open car door, gripping the top of it as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. I didn't break my stride. I kept walking down the sidewalk, maintaining a steady, even pace. I didn't look away, but I didn't glare at him either. I simply looked at him the way you look at a stranger you pass on the street. As I approached the section of the sidewalk directly across from his car, he finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, carrying across the quiet morning street. "Mason," he called out, taking half a step forward. "Please, we need to talk. I can hire a lawyer to fix the trust. I can give you the college fund early. Just give me 5 minutes." He was still trying to buy his way out of the consequences. He thought the damage was transactional. He thought a check and a conversation could undo 20 years of emotional neglect and the ultimate betrayal of throwing me away like garbage. I stopped. I turned my head and looked directly into his eyes. "There is nothing left to talk about," I said. My voice wasn't angry. It was calm, steady, and incredibly final. "You made your choice on Tuesday. I accepted it. Now you have to accept it too." "You're my son," he pleaded, his voice breaking, tears welling up in his eyes. "No," I replied softly. "I was your scapegoat. You lost your son a long time ago. Do not come here again." I turned my head back and continued walking toward the bus stop at the end of the block. I listened closely as I walked away. I waited to hear the sound of his footsteps rushing after me. I waited to hear him yell, to fight for me, to finally show a spine. But all I heard was the heavy slam of a car door and the sound of an engine starting up. I didn't look back. I had established my boundary, a massive concrete wall that he would never, ever be allowed to cross again. The power dynamic had completely shifted. He was no longer the judge and jury of my worth. He was just an old man sitting alone in a car, choking on his own regrets. I sat on the bus, taking a window seat near the back. The worn leather felt cool against my back as the vehicle rumbled through the city streets. I watched the neighborhood's transition from quiet suburbs to bustling commercial districts. People were rushing to work, holding coffee cups, talking on phones, entirely unaware of the massive shift that had just occurred in my universe. I leaned my head against the vibrating glass and let myself truly process the concept of karma. People often think of karma as a magical force that drops a piano on the head of a bad person. But the reality is far more terrifying and precise. Karma isn't magic. It's just the inevitable consequence of a person's own character. My father and Elijah weren't destroyed by bad luck or a malicious plot. They were destroyed by their own actions. Elijah's greed made him steal, and his arrogance made him think he could frame me for it. My father's cowardice made him believe the lie because it was easier than facing the truth. Their own toxic traits had built the trap, set the bait, and sprung the lock. All I did was walk away and let the trap close on them. For years, I had believed that I was the failure because I couldn't fix them. I thought if I just worked harder, smiled more, argued less, I could mold them into the loving family I desperately wanted. But sitting on that bus, watching the city wake up, I realized the ultimate truth. You cannot heal people who are addicted to their own sickness. You cannot force people to value you when their entire identity relies on putting you down. The moment I stopped trying to prove my innocence to a rigged jury was the moment I won. The moment my father kicked me out, he thought he was punishing me. In reality, he had handed me the key to my own cage. He forced me out of the darkness and into the light. I pulled out my phone and looked at my reflection in the dark screen. I looked different. The tension around my eyes was gone. The defensive set of my jaw had relaxed. I was no longer the invisible son. I was Mason. I was an independent man with a solid career, a fierce aunt who loved me unconditionally, and a future that belonged entirely to me. As the bus pulled up to my office building, I gathered my briefcase. I felt a surge of pride, a deep, powerful respect for the man I had become through the fire. I had survived the worst they could throw at me, and I hadn't let it turn me bitter. I had let it make me free. 3 days after the legal explosion at my father's house, life at Aunt Clara's had settled into a comfortable, peaceful rhythm. It was a Saturday morning. The sun was pouring through the kitchen windows, hitting the hardwood floors in warm, golden squares. I was sitting at the kitchen island, eating a piece of toast with jam, listening to the comforting sound of Clara washing dishes at the sink and humming an old jazz tune. It was a picture of domestic tranquility. And then, my phone buzzed on the counter. I hadn't completely locked down my phone yet, leaving a few channels open just in case David needed to contact me regarding the trust paperwork. I glanced at the screen. The text message wasn't from a lawyer. It was from an unknown number, but I recognized the cadence immediately. "Hey, it's Elijah. Had to borrow a burner phone. Listen, I need you to do me a solid. Can you go by the house and bring me my history notes from my desk? My lawyer says I might be able to get a plea deal if I show I'm trying to finish my degree. Thanks, man." I stared at the glowing text message, the piece of toast halfway to my mouth. I read it 3 times just to make sure my brain wasn't misinterpreting the words. The sheer, unadulterated audacity was almost impressive. There was no apology. There was no mention of the fact that he had lied, tried to frame me for a felony, stolen my mother's jewelry, bankrupted our father, and gotten himself arrested. There was no acknowledgement of the trauma he had caused. He was facing prison time, his life was in complete ruins, and his instinct was still to treat me like his personal errand boy. He truly believed that the world, including me, still existed solely to serve his needs. He thought he could just hit the reset button and I would fall right back into line, desperate to help my little brother. A week ago, a text like this would have sent me into a blind rage. I would have typed out a massive, furious paragraph, screaming at him through the screen, demanding an apology, trying to force him to see how toxic he was. I would have engaged in the battle. But sitting there, with the taste of strawberry jam in my mouth and the sunlight warming my back, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel a spike of adrenaline. I felt a profound sense of pity, followed immediately by complete detachment. I realized that I had finally, truly stopped waiting for him to become someone else. He was a manipulative, selfish person, and he always would be. Engaging with him, even to tell him off, was just giving him the attention he desperately craved. I didn't reply. I didn't type a single letter. I simply tapped the screen, deleted the message thread, and then blocked the burner number. I set the phone face down on the marble counter, picked up my coffee mug, and took a slow sip. Clara turned around from the sink, drying her hands on a towel. She raised an eyebrow. "Spam. Something like that?" I smiled, taking another bite of my toast. "Just taking out the trash." That was the last time I ever heard directly from Elijah. The ghost of my brother vanished into the digital ether, and my morning remained perfectly, wonderfully quiet. Months passed, and the calendar pages turned, putting more and more distance between me and the Tuesday evening that changed my life. The change wasn't just geographical. It was entirely psychological. When you remove a massive weight from a plant, it immediately starts to grow toward the sun. That is exactly what happened to my career. Without the constant, draining mental load of navigating my father's expectations and Sarah's passive-aggressive attacks, my energy skyrocketed. I threw myself into my work at the logistics firm. I wasn't just clocking in and out anymore. I was innovating. I redesigned our entire regional distribution model, saving the company hundreds of thousands of dollars in transit inefficiencies. Gabriel, my boss, noticed immediately. On a rainy Friday afternoon, he called me into his office. He didn't offer me a raise, he offered me an empire. He was opening a new branch on the West Coast, and he wanted me to be the director of operations. It came with a massive salary bump, stock options, and the authority to build my own team from the ground up. I accepted it before he even finished pitching the details. That evening, I took Clara and Dylan out to the best steakhouse in the city to celebrate. We sat in a plush leather booth, clinking heavy crystal glasses of champagne. Halfway through the dinner, Clara reached into her purse and pulled out a thick, manila envelope. She slid it across the white tablecloth toward me. "I was going to wait until you moved to give this to you," Clara said, her eyes shining with pride. "But considering the promotion, I think now is the perfect time." I opened the envelope. Inside were documents from David's law firm. It was the complete transfer of my mother's trust. Not just the sapphire bracelet, which was now safely locked in a bank vault under my name, but the college fund. Because I had paid my own way through state school by working 3 jobs, the fund had sat untouched for 20 years, quietly accumulating compound interest. I looked at the number at the bottom of the statement. It was staggering. It was enough to buy a house in cash or start my own company. "She wanted you to have a safety net," Clara said softly, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "She knew Robert would never protect you, so she made sure I could. Use it to build whatever life you want, Mason." I looked at the paper, my vision blurring slightly with tears. My mother had been gone for 2 decades, but she had reached through time to catch me when I finally fell. I wasn't an orphan. I had a family. I had Clara, I had Dylan, and I had a mother who loved me enough to outsmart the man who tried to break me. A few weeks before I packed up my apartment to move to the West Coast, I was grabbing a quick coffee downtown. I was standing in line, checking emails on my phone, when I heard someone say my name. "Mason? Holy crap, is that you?" I turned around. It was Julian. He looked terrible. The confident, patronizing smirk he wore at the family dinner was gone. He looked exhausted, his clothes slightly rumpled. "Julian," I said evenly, giving him a polite, brief nod. He immediately stepped out of line and pulled me toward a corner table. He seemed desperate to talk, practically vibrating with nervous energy. "Man, I am so sorry about what happened," Julian started, his words tumbling out rapidly. "I didn't know Elijah was lying. I swear. If I had known." "It's fine, Julian." I cut him off, not wanting to hear his pathetic excuses. "It's in the past. I have to get back to work." "Wait. Do you know what happened to them?" Julian asked, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "To your dad and Elijah?" I stopped. I didn't actively seek out information about them, but I couldn't deny a fleeting curiosity about how the dust had settled. "No, I haven't spoken to them." Julian leaned in. "It's a complete disaster. Sarah left your dad. The moment the bank froze their joint accounts to investigate the wire fraud, she packed her bags and moved back to her sister's place. She filed for divorce 3 weeks later, demanding alimony your dad can't even afford to pay because all his cash is tied up in lawyer fees." I sipped my coffee, my expression completely neutral. "And Elijah?" Julian continued, clearly hoping for a reaction. "His lawyer managed to keep him out of federal prison, but he's on heavy probation. He has a felony record now. He can't get a job anywhere near finance or tech. Last I heard, he's working the night shift at a massive commercial laundry facility on the edge of town, hauling wet linens. Your dad is living alone in that big house, and the bank is threatening to foreclose." Julian paused, waiting for me to laugh, to gloat, to show some sign of vicious satisfaction. But I didn't. I just looked at him. I felt a cold, objective acknowledgement of the facts. The universe had balanced the scales. The golden child was doing manual labor in the dark, and the arrogant king was sitting alone in an empty castle he couldn't afford. They had completely destroyed each other. "Thanks for the update, Julian," I said, my voice flat. Take care of yourself. I walked out of the coffee shop, throwing my empty cup into the trash bin on the corner. I didn't look back at Julian, and I didn't spare another thought for Robert or Elijah. They were no longer characters in my story. They were just cautionary tales I had left behind in the rearview mirror. My last night in the city, I stayed at Aunt Clara's house. Most of my boxes were already shipped out west, so I was living out of the same canvas backpack I had arrived with months ago. After dinner, I went up to the spare bedroom to pack my toiletries. I opened the top drawer of the antique dresser to look for an extra pair of socks. And there it was, the small, deep blue velvet box. Clara had left it in the drawer for me to take on my journey. I picked it up. I ran my thumb over the soft fabric, feeling the shape of the hinge. I opened it. The sapphire caught the dim light of the bedroom lamp, glittering quietly against the white satin interior. It was beautiful. It was a piece of my history. But as I stared at it, I realized something profound. I didn't feel the crushing weight of my father's accusation anymore. I didn't feel the sting of Elijah's betrayal. I didn't feel the panic of being thrown out into the night. It was just a small blue stone in a velvet box. It had absolutely no power over me. The door that had closed behind me that Tuesday evening wasn't a punishment. It was a rescue mission. The universe had forced me out of a toxic environment because I was too loyal, too hopeful to walk away on my own. I had lost a house, yes, but I had walked out of an illusion and walked into a reality where I was loved, respected, and incredibly successful. The quiet of that Tuesday evening turned out to be the first evening of something else entirely. The first evening of my real life. I snapped the box shut, tossed it into my backpack, and zipped it up. I was ready to go. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a long journey, but it's one I had to share. Walking away from family is one of the hardest things a person can ever do, even when it's the right thing. I hope this resonated with you in some way, especially if you've ever felt like the invisible person in your own life. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation, having to walk away from people you loved to protect your own peace? Let me know down in the comments. I read every single one. And if you made it all the way to this exact moment, I want you to comment the letter W below. W stands for winner. It's the secret code for the 1% Club. The incredible group of you who have the patience and empathy to listen to a story until the very end. It lets me know who my real listeners are. If my journey helped you, or if you just believe in the power of karma, please hit that like button and follow the channel. Your support means the world to me, and we have plenty more stories to share. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I'll see you in the next video.